I'm not going to write down what I'm about to say because I know if I write it down, I'm like, no way can I say that. So I'm just going to have to improvise, and this stuff might be very shocking. So don't watch if you don't like to hear stuff that is completely not PC. But I want to explain that in my head, I know, crazy as it is, there's a huge connection between the Epstein files and China. And I'll need to go through a little background so you can see the connection I see, whether that connection is true or not, or you can just see into my brain. So in my experience, and again, I'm 64, when I was growing up, I met so many Jewish people that were beyond brilliant, mathematically, with language, just blew my mind. Now, if you don't know, like my father was Jewish, but I don't think he was like really one of the really smart Jews. Anyway, but still, like I said, when I was growing up, Jewish people were just extraordinarily smart and clever, especially mathematics, the sciences, whatever, right? In fact, I remember when I was a kid, I used to read about Russia, and they used to say that even though they didn't like Jewish people there, all the doctors there were Jewish for the top party of the Soviet Union. Anyway, so that was my thing. So the Epstein, that whole thing was really it's part of that. See, many Jews that went to Israel, or many Jews in period, just like everything, this is true for everything, for all races and cultures and peoples, there's a certain amount, the larger minority, I think, that just wants to live with everybody else and do around their, do their business, go to school, become a doctor, lawyer, whatever, get somewhere in society, give back. Most people are like that. And I would say, if we're just talking about the Jewish culture, yeah, I think most Jewish culture was like that. But there was also a part of Jewish culture that was very aggressive and not aggressive is the wrong word for it, but criminal, if I can put it that way. So Israel is basically a huge criminal state. And again, I'm not saying that all Israelis are like that there. Most Israelis are not like that. They don't care about that kind of stuff. But, just think about it from a very high level, right? You have a people, right? These Ashkenazi Jews, again, my father was one, and which makes me half of one. And they basically lobbied the political powers at the time to give them a piece of a nation somewhere. Because they basically said, oh, look at the Holocaust, we all got killed, we need our own home. Never mind that all the Jews in Europe had been killed in the Holocaust. There really wasn't many left from that group to put into Israel, but there's still plenty of Jewish refugees in Europe. I think maybe even almost 2 million of them or whatever. So for the Europeans and for the United States, it's sort of like a weird thing. Like you had these really clever people doing things to basically get this land. You also had a bunch of immigrants that the Europeans didn't, because Europe was so war ravaged. It wasn't so much, there might have been some anti-Semitism too, but there's also some like, where are we going to put these people, right? All our buildings are blown out. So through a lot of those things, you get the Jewish state in 1948, right? But you have to remember still at root, right? You have a people, right? You have a bunch of these Zionists, these Jewish people, basically finagling their way into getting a country for themselves. It really is amazing when you think about it, like, how clever they must have been to not only get this land, but to build a very powerful country around it, right? And so when I was a kid, I remember that I'd read about, I don't know if it's true or not, that when the United States sent Israel its first F-15, it says, okay, we'll give you one F-15 or a few of them or something, that Israel worked on it and they improved it. And that's been happening since then, that Israel is basically the super smart Jews in Israel and America, wherever, have helped the U.S. Defense Department make more effective weapons. And they're just very good at it. In fact, the military, the defense industry in Israel is very large. I forget what it is. It's like 4% or maybe 14%. I forget. I wish I had the stats, but it's very large. It's a big part of what Israel does. So But that you're talking about many years ago, right? You're talking about, from my life, you're talking about maybe like the 1980s or 70s until the let's say like 2010 or whatever. So you had these Jewish people building up Israel, getting money, doing all this stuff. But then you have all these criminals. They're dealing in diamonds and oil, and they're just basically dealing with these commodities all over the world under the radar that really aren't affected by American laws, and Israel doesn't really have the laws against them. So in a sense, because again, like I said, think about it, these people got this land as a country that they hadn't been living in for 1,000 years or whatever, right? They just came in and took a bunch of it, from Europe, right? So think about it, right? So it's criminal in a sense that you're taking land from a place, they're already indigenous people, and you're giving it to these other people, right? Of course, that's part of U.S. history, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but there's similarities there too, and similar problems. But anyway, so they get this land, they build it up, because they're not, for whatever reason, like I said, it's basically, there's a lot of criminality in Israel. And again, I don't mean like criminality like you're going down the street and you're saying to the grocer, you got to give me like 10% of your money. Sorry about the dog. Come on, Benji, stop it. It's, you're doing trade. You're doing trade outside the jurisdictions of various nations' laws and stuff like that. So anyway, so you have Israel. It's doing really well. You have the super smart Jews, right, that get it, that are populating it. But then you also, like I said, you have this small class of ones that are only really thinking about how to manipulate governments for Israel's best interest and for these criminals' best interest, right? So that's sort of what's going on. So the Epstein was basically, he's just like it's not, the pedophilia was like part of it, but really it's just more about power influence. It's about people in power wanting to meet each other and getting more power and more money. And then because many of them were Jewish, right, they were like, yeah, well, this helps Jews. It helps Jews, helps Jews here in America, helps Jews in Israel. So everybody sort of had this, like, we're all a bunch of, Jews helping ourselves, and this is good. Don't get me wrong. It's not like they were like, oh, we're Jews and we hate Gentiles or anything like that. I don't think it was like that at all. It's a very symbiotic relationship. The Jews, in a sense, for the Gentiles were like, okay, well, we're very clever and we can make you rich. And the Gentiles were like, yeah, okay, fine, and that's what they did. And so they had this relationship. And that's the other thing, like they say about AIPAC, like, yeah, I mean, Jews support a lot of politicians, but they also get them elected because, again, they're very clever. So, okay, so now this is where it gets, hopefully, maybe very interesting. The problem that they're facing is, like all groups that are really smart, they get stupid. They intermarry, their social, the constructs, like when I was young, like the Jewish thing was learn. Like it's really important in Jewish culture to learn a lot. That's gone now. Like Jewish parents today aren't about like you have to go learn. It's more like you have to go to the right school. It's much more status oriented than it was 30 years ago. So the cleverness of the Jews, and again, sorry to be offensive, has really gone down quite a bit. And if you look at, Netanyahu, I mean, sure, he used to be one of the super clever. He used to be super clever, but as he got older, he wasn't as clever. And now he has to do deals with these other Jews that are morons, like Smoltrich and Gvir, right? I mean, like he's surrounded by these idiots, but he has to bring them in to keep the government stable. And again, I could go down a whole bunch of rabbit holes with that, but you get the idea. What I'm saying is that the Jews today in Israel and the United States are not the Jews from 50 years ago. Those were really smart, clever ones. The ones today are inundated, are just polluted by tons of stupid ones. And Trump, in a sense, see, I feel like in the past, like one of the reasons the Epstein group worked so well is that nobody knew about it. Nobody really understood it. And they kept everything behind closed doors because they were smart. In order to really get influence, right, to get political influence, to get a nation to use its military for your benefit, you have to keep it out of the public. It's not like the public votes or anything, or they're going to do anything. They can do much about it, but they do actually have a long-term effect. If you do it for long enough, the public will turn on you, and then politically you lose power. So it was very important for the Zionists to work under the radar, which they did for a long time. But with Epstein, what happened, like I said, because they're getting dumber, now it's getting out. They're not able to keep what they're doing a secret. And because they can't keep it a secret, it's now out in the open, and they can't get stuff done that they want to get done, which makes them more desperate. And that's why they have such a hard-on now to attack Israel, to get the United States to attack Israel, because they want to get that unity back. They want to get that power back. They can't get it. Let me just pick them up. Oh, they can't just do this, like I said, behind closed doors. So they're getting desperate, and plus a lot of their population, they've propagandized them to believe all this nonsense about Iranians, and the clever Jews, in a sense, can't basically go now to the Smoltrich and Gvir and say, listen, a lot of the stuff we told you is garbage. You need to back off. We need to be subtle here. They can't do that because they truly believe it. There's so many Israelis that believe the propaganda that they've been taught for like decades, like, oh, the Arabs and the Palestinians are all bad. They're all jihadists. They all want to kill your babies and stuff like that. Too many Israelis believe that. They believe everybody in the Middle East is out to get them. So for certain political reasons, the clever Jews instilled this paranoia into the rank and file Jews, and now it's out of hand, and it's controlling things. And the clever Jews can't get away from it because it's everywhere in their government, in their businesses, whatever. It's just anyway. So what does this have to do with China? Because China, let's say, but the Asians are smart. In fact, it's been long recognized that in many ways, in some tests, they are smarter than the Jews. Let's not forget about who's smarter or not or anything like that. I would just say that right now, the Asians are the cleverest people. They're super, super clever. And there's nothing in the United States that I look around here that's made or by Americans. Very little stuff. It all comes from Asia. Asia is what Jews used to be 50 years ago, 70 years ago. Like, they really value education and engineering and the sciences. And so here's the bell curve, and it's a very controversial book. And many people are upset that it says that whites are smarter than blacks. And in a sense, some of it does say that, but it's very, very nuanced. And it definitely says that, okay, we're talking about big numbers here. We're not saying that that all blacks are dumber than whites. What it's basically, you're talking about the ends of the curve. And that's sort of what this book is about. So, and it's also against whites, low IQ whites overbreeding. So the book is very complex. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that, but I would just say that you really have to read the book objectively. I know it's hard, but I just want to point out. So this book was written in, let me see when this is written. Well, I mean, as one case, like when I looked up China in the Chinese in the index, I didn't find anything. I found it under Asians. So think about that. Like, this book is not, it's a modern book, but it's not, 1994, right? So this is 30 years old. And so I had to look up Asians, and it's talking about medical school entrances. And it says, the other category, mostly Asian. Remember, this is 30 years ago when it was actually very difficult for a Chinese person to immigrate to the United States. Most Asians had higher scores than whites on the physical science and fractionally on biological science standing, respectively at the 56th and 52nd percentile of white distribution, while scoring lower in verbal reasoning, which you'd expect, right? I mean, because English isn't a Chinese point of view. So 30 years ago, it's saying, hey, you know what? Asians are smarter than everybody, when it comes to the physical science, which is why there are so many Asians in medicine, because they are very good at it. And again, not all of them or anything. I'm not making, that whites aren't smart or blacks or anything like that. I'm just saying that, there are certain subtle differences, whatever. And again, like I said, I'm just blowing smoke here, whatever. But the basics of the story is that really smart Jews, the Epstein thing was very clever. They kept everything hidden. Yeah, some of it was disgusting, but men are disgusting everywhere, whatever the race. I think we're going to agree on that. Black, white, Asian, whatever. So, anyway, but then as they got dumber, they were infiltrated by dumber people that they had been propagandized into being paranoid and whatever. And then, and then not enough love of education. So now they're basically stupid. And they have Trump that they want to help them. Like, how you think you can get anywhere with a guy like that? It's just, again, it's blowing my mind. So what this has to do with it is that, like I said, Israel now is really grasping because they are internally falling apart. And the Asians are ascendant. They're at the top. Their engineering is incredible. All the radars that they sent to Iran or wherever, they can see all the aircraft flying for the United States. Now, they're not going to give Iran offensive weapons, right? Like jet fighters. I don't think they can give the top line jet, but they'll give them all the defensive stuff. But what that means is that Iran, because its defensive stuff is so strong, it now makes their offensive that more potent, right? If they can see what the United States is doing. And the United States military, as I said, because the Jews have gotten so stupid, sorry to say, the Americans have too. And the Americans have gotten not so much stupid, but because it's such a bureaucracy and such pork barrel politics with defense, they build all these stupid weapons that are just show ponies that have no proof on the battlefield. I just don't see any of them are going to work well. They're just overcomplicated. I mean, you use software. I use software, written by, Americans. Just today I was using Microsoft Teams. I mean, how poorly, how buggy and stupid how they thought out it is. It's just incredible. And people say, well, Microsoft is different than, the people in defense working at Raytheon programming the missiles. I'm like, no, it's not the same people coming out of the same freaking colleges here. And look, if they can't get teams to integrate properly, or talk to it, whatever, to do stuff properly, then I don't believe that they're going to make these F-35 fighters communicate properly with these missile and radar systems and aircraft carriers and all that Skynet crap they have going on. No, I don't think it's going to work. I think the Asian stuff and the Chinese stuff works. The Chinese stuff, again, just my opinion, I'm going to do another video about this. It's just mind-blowingly, there's no comparison. Like in World War II, the United States was this super powerful manufacturing and engineering powerhouse. We were engineering and manufacturing was everything. And China, you look at pictures of China, they're pulling around carts. It's the same today in exact reverse. We might as well in our country be pulling around little rickshaws. And the Chinese and the Asians are up here in engineering and equipment and tools. The days of them stealing our ideas, that's over. That's 20 years ago. No, they're ahead. That's my opinion. Anyway, so this is what I wanted to say is the Epstein files. What it shows me is basically that the whole Jewish exceptionalism is over. They're overrun by idiots. They are idiots. With Trump, they're going to try now to grab for anything. They don't even have a good excuse for attacking Iran. They're just going to want to do it. They're living on borrowed time. It's again, I always say, the United States thinks that it's still the superpower of World War II. That's in our memory. And the Israelis are still thinking yeah, we're the ones that improved the F-15. Those days are over. You're just a bunch of knuckleheads, right? So you're a bunch of knuckleheads. China buys oil from Iran, most of it's oil. It doesn't really care about any of that stuff, but if you stop them from getting the oil, they're clever, and they're going to make sure they protect their source of oil from Iran. And it means that if Israel and the United States does something stupid, they're going to suffer something stupid because they're not clever. And the Asians are very clever. All right. Well, how long is that? 20 minutes? All right. What can I say? I lost a tooth over here. And I have these dentures, but I just can't bother with them. So sorry if that bothers you too. But, it's good because you think, he's an idiot. What does he know? So you won't get mad at me because he's a toothless idiot. Later.